All right, you've left Australia, you've made a successful tax exit, but what happens when the next tax time rolls around, when the next financial year ends? Do you have to lodge an Australian tax return as a non-resident? A lot of people assume once they get on the plane and go, file their exit tax return and so on, that they're done with the ATO. That can sometimes be the case, but it's certainly not always the case. And for a lot of people, they will have continuing lodgement requirements in Australia. So let's talk a little bit about when you might still have to lodge a tax return as a non-resident and when you probably won't have to. We help Australians understand the tax consequences of moving overseas and how to properly leave Australia's tax system. And the question about what happens to your tax lodging requirements after you leave, this is something that comes up all the time when we're doing consultations with our clients. The first thing to understand is that by becoming a non-resident, exiting Australia's tax system, this does not automatically mean that you do not have to lodge a tax return in the future. There's actually two issues here. The first thing is, are you a legitimate non-resident? The second is, do you have ongoing tax lodgement obligations in Australia? So generally everyone will lodge a final resident tax return of the year when you go from being a tax resident to a non-tax resident. You cease your residency at that point in time in that financial year. But what happens after that, in the financial year after you have already left, really depends on your situation. For some Australians, they won't need to lodge another tax return. If you have genuinely become a non-resident for tax purposes and you don't have any Australian sourced income, you probably won't need to lodge. If you do have Australian sourced income and that income has already been dealt with through the withholding tax system, you might not need to lodge either. For Australian sourced income that has not been dealt with through the tax withholding system, you're probably going to have to lodge. A lot of Australians continue lodging tax returns for years after they have ceased residency in Australia. One of the most common examples of why you will need to lodge a tax return is if you have investment properties. If you're still earning rental income from investment properties in Australia, that income hasn't been taxed and it will need to be taxed as part of your tax return. The same can apply if you're running an Australian business, if you have other kinds of Australian sourced income such as bank interest or unfranked dividends or any other Australian sourced income that will need to be taxed. So moving overseas does not necessarily mean that your relationship with the Australian Tax Office is over. Another thing that confuses people is overseas income. Generally speaking, income earned overseas outside of Australia is not taxable in Australia to foreign or non-tax residents. Obviously, this is one of the big reasons why people choose to leave Australia's tax system, getting that income legitimately outside of the Australian tax net. But as I said above, if you have Australian sourced income, you may still have Australian tax reporting requirements. We see all kinds of stuff here with people that we talk to. There's people who have kept lodging tax returns year after year, paying accountancy fees and so on, when they didn't really necessarily have a requirement to lodge had they sort of done a bit of administrative work and set things up correctly. And then there's the ones who have left and have made the wrong assumption that they don't have any reporting requirements anymore in Australia. They talk to an accountant a bit later, maybe that's us, maybe it's someone else, and they find out that they have a bunch of years of unlodged tax returns and potentially penalties for late lodgements stacking up. Or there's people who think they've become a non-resident in Australia, but their case for leaving isn't really genuine. The facts do not stack up to support their residency status, and the ATO is still treating them as a tax resident because they haven't planned and set things up and made the right moves as far as leaving Australia goes. The reality is everyone's circumstances are different, and this is why you can have two Aussies leaving at the same time, living in the same country overseas, and have vastly different tax reporting requirements back in Australia. So if you're planning to leave Australia or you've already left and you're not sure about your ongoing lodgement requirements, this is the kind of thing that we work with our clients with every day here. Feel free to reach out if you would like some assistance around that. And if you'd like to understand the process better for yourself before booking advice with us, we have the Australian Tax Exit Kit, which helps you go through all the things you need to be thinking about and doing before you leave and also after you leave to legitimately cease residency in Australia and reduce the chances of running into issues with the tax office. We'll leave it there, guys. I hope this has helped you understand the topic around non-resident lodging a little bit better. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you later.